Kaha 1.
Welcome to the Essentials for Cemetery Monument Care TEL course. I'm Mary Striegel, Chief of the Materials Research Program at the National Center for Preservation Technology and Training, and this is my colleague.
And I'm Jason Church, Materials Conservator, also with NCPTT. And before we start today's broadcast, we just want to make sure that you, the audience, know that interaction is a big part of this. So to do that, I want you to use your push-to-talk microphone. And to use this, you hold it about 12 inches from your face. Push the talk button, very similar to how you would use a walkie-talkie. Introduce yourself with your name and your site location. We'll call on you, then ask your question. Then push it again, of course, to ask your question, then release. If we get more than one person calling in at the same time, we'll stop you, call one of you by name, answer your question, then move on. We'll have some time at the end and a few key places during the presentation to ask for questions, but it all means if you have questions during the TEL course today, just let us know. Go ahead. We want to answer your questions and make sure that you get as much out of this as you possibly can. So we look forward to your participation.
Now, today's course emphasizes sound preservation decision-making skills and hands-on treatments for headstones. Before we move forward with the course, I would like to cover a few additional housekeeping issues. The materials for the course include readings, handouts, your participant's guide, which you should have available to you now, and a copy of the slides that we'll be using. These can all be found on the NPS TEL website that you see here on the screen. The handouts include a bibliography, a web-based resource list, and some sample conservation and condition survey forms for your use. And we hope that this information will be useful to you. The information that I've just told you about is also listed on page 2 of your participant's guide. You may want to note that there will be a 10-minute break in the course today, and we'll leave plenty of time for questions. Before we proceed, I would like to mention that there will be a 1-hour course entitled The Essentials or the Basics for Iron Fencing Care. That will be held from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time today. And Jason Church will be instructing that. We hope that we'll be able to see you there. Now, if you turn to page 5 of your participant's guide, I'll review the goals and objectives of this course. You should know that after the workshop, the learners should be familiar with understanding the causes and effects of stone deterioration. They need to recognize the ethics of conservation treatments, strategies, and to be able to have the use of a long-term maintenance plan. Additionally, learners will be able to perform visual inspection of headstones, document the conditions of the grave markers, and stabilize and reset small monuments, those that have few complications. The National Center for Preservation Technology and Training is an office of the National Park Service. Jason and I work there. We have a small team of researchers and colleagues that help us develop new innovative technologies for historic preservation and train in those technologies. We work in the fields of archaeology and collections, architecture and engineering, historic landscapes, and materials research. The National Center is an office of the National Park Service, and we were established by an act of Congress in 1992. We're located on the campus of Northwestern State University of Louisiana, located in Natchitoches, Louisiana. Let's move on with our course now, and we'll begin by talking about different threats to cemeteries. And you can follow along with us on page 9 of your participant's guide. There are many types of threats that cemeteries face. They include a variety of different man-made and environmental factors that can cause deterioration to our grave markers. The first that we want to talk about is inappropriate maintenance and management practices. The way in which a cemetery is managed and the way in which people interact with that cemetery will affect the longevity of the grave markers. On the left here we see mowers that are used to mow the grass in a cemetery. Those mowers need to be fitted with appropriate bumpers so that when the mower comes near a marker, it will be protected. The marker will be protected from the mower by a bumper. Also, weed eaters are commonly used in most cemeteries to control the vegetation around a grave marker. On the right, we see a weed eater that's been left sitting on grave markers, and our concern is that this may cause damage from fluids leaking from the weed eater. Another real danger by weed eaters is that they can chip and mar the surfaces of the stones if they're not used correctly when controlling vegetation. So while it may be counterintuitive to you, you're going to want to use the thinnest string possible for those weed eaters so as to not damage the grave markers. It may mean that you go through more string for your weed eater, but you in the end will be better preserving the stones that you're working with. A next issue for cemeteries is that of vandalism and theft. Vandalism happens in every cemetery that we know, and particularly in those private cemeteries. On the left we see vandalism that was caused by young boys, 11-year-olds, that came through a cemetery in East Bridgewater. They managed to break the stones. And this leaves a problem for those who are responsible for the maintenance of the cemetery. On the right, we see a Spanish-American War monument that's located in Prospect Hill Cemetery in Omaha, Nebraska. We held a workshop there, and 2 weeks later, someone came along in broad daylight. They wrapped a rope around the monument at the top and pulled the bronze monument off and drove away with it before anyone saw them. So theft and vandalism can be real issues for destruction and deterioration in a cemetery. The third aspect that we want to talk about is that of the effect of air pollution on our monuments. Air pollution, particularly sulfur dioxide, interacts with calcareous stone, that could be a marble or a limestone, to form gypsum crust. These are the black deposits that you often find in protected areas, not out in the areas where water flows, but under shelters, you'll see the growth of these gypsum crusts. It ultimately results in spalling and surface loss. For example, we see on our left the monument at Cave Hill Cemetery in Louisville, Kentucky, where the features of the young girl have been lost. Again, on the right, we'll see a monument that in 1988, the statue still had a head and shoulders, but the results of acid rain caused a weakening of the stone and a deterioration of the stone until those features were lost. Now, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about biodeterioration, which can sometimes be confused with air pollution because you'll see black products on your stones. But biodeterioration is different because you'll often find it on open surfaces. When I say biodeterioration, I mean the attack of microorganisms from bacteria to algae to fungi. And what we see in Elmwood Cemetery in Memphis, Tennessee, is the surfaces are covered with black biogrowth, which can probably be molds or fungi that we're seeing here. Sometimes you'll get black algae or blue-green algae that will look black. The result is that those microorganisms will actually feed on or send their waste products onto the stone, and that causes deterioration of the stone. But in order for biological growth to grow, they need water, and water-related deterioration, on the next slide, is the type of thing that we see often. Water-related deterioration can be as simple as rising damp from monuments that are in contact with the ground to more complex issues. On the left, we see a mausoleum in La Rigoleta in Buenos Aires, Argentina. In this mausoleum, we'll see biodeterioration in the result of the tree that's growing out of the roof of the mausoleum. But we also see the spalling and loss of surfaces on this brick structure. The spalling of the stucco is a result of water penetrating from the roof and from the ground to cause deterioration. As we saw there on the right, we also see the loss of brick, of mortar, and the softening of soft lime mortars, and the loss of those mortars causing deterioration to a box tomb that can be found in Natchitoches, Louisiana. Also, sometimes monuments have problems themselves, and that type of problem is called inherent vice. The inherent vice is a problem that is associated with the material that the grave marker is made of itself. For example, here we see a slate marker that's in contact with the ground. The slate is made with in a sedimentary process, and it has bedding planes. If you look on the right, you see the distinct lines or bedding planes of the stone. When moisture gets into those bedding planes, there are often clays associated with those planes. The clays will expand. As they expand, they literally push those planes apart, and you can have surface loss, as we've seen here. Another aspect that we talk about in cemeteries is that of metal corrosion associated with grave markers. We see that iron corrosion in particular can cause a problem. When metals get wet and dry out and wet and dry out, they result in corrosion products. The corrosion products are bigger than the metal itself. They take up more space and room. As the metal corrodes, it pushes against the stone. Here we see a grave marker in Old Anacoco Baptist Cemetery in Leesville, Louisiana. For some reason, the grave marker itself was shimmed into the base of the stone with iron shims, not the more commonly used lead shims. When that iron expanded, it literally drove the base apart and caused the loss of surface and loss of integrity of the stone. When that happened, the base failed and the grave marker fell. So we deal with a lot of different types of issues in cemeteries, and one of them is the invasive flora and fauna. On the left, we see vegetation and higher order plants that can be a real problem in cemeteries. And on the right, we see animal burrows that can be both dangerous to visitors to a cemetery and can undermine the foundations of grave markers themselves. Safety in cemeteries is an important issue for us, and we have to understand that we need to protect both ourselves and the visitors to the site. We also have to deal with issues like disasters. Disasters can strike us at any time, and the disasters can be a wide range of natural or man-made events. A man-made event would be something like a car that would be driven into a grave marker or a fence. Natural disasters can range from earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, and flooding. And here in this slide, we'll see effects of wind damage and tornado damage in cemeteries and the effects of flooding. Whenever you're dealing with disasters in a national cemetery or a Park Service cemetery, the first and foremost aspect is to protect yourself first. Make sure that you have a re-entry plan to going into the cemetery, and don't go in by yourself. Make sure that you understand the hazards. It may be limbs that are loose and ready to fall. It may be unseen erosion. It can be, in the case of, for example, Hurricane Katrina, there were literally crypts that were opened up and vaults opened up, and you had the risk of stones falling. So natural disasters can cause a real problem in cemeteries, and the best way to deal with those is to make sure that you have a disaster preparedness plan. Now I'd like for us to turn our attention to the topic of materials that we find in cemeteries. And in particular, we're going to, if you're following along, we're now on page 10 of your participant's guide. And we'll be talking about the wide range of materials that we can find in a cemetery. These materials may include metals, such as iron fences that we see on the left. They can include structures that may be masonry, stone or brick masonry. We may be dealing with complex carved figures, such as the angel that we see on the right. Or we may be dealing with a wide variety of stone. It's important for us to understand those range of materials. Let's talk a little bit about the issues that are associated with the materials that we find in the cemeteries. It's important to identify materials when doing condition assessments and surveys, so it's useful for you to make sure that you understand the types of materials that you find in your cemetery. If possible, identify the material or materials before any cleaning or conservation treatment. The substrate materials that you're working on, that is the materials that these grave markers are made of, will behave differently, and products that you will use for cleaning or for treatments will behave differently on the different types of stones. You want to evaluate the condition of the surface prior to any cleaning that you might do. Is the stone powdery or sugary? Do you run the risk of losing that original material before you clean? The other question that you need to ask is, will the cleaning remove that original material, and is the cleaning method you're going to use going to remove the material that you want to remove? Those soiling and stain, have you got appropriate treatments? It is not a situation where one cleaning method or cleaning material fits all problems. So you have to understand those materials you're dealing with. Let's take a look or a quick survey of the types of materials that we find in cemeteries. We'll start by looking at marbles. We find marbles in national cemeteries in the form of federally issued headstones. We find marbles in complex carved objects like you see of the angel on the right of this slide. These marbles, let's take a closer look at the marbles, and we'll look at the microstructure of those marbles. Marble is a metamorphic stone. It is formed from sedimentary stones like limestone that then undergo high temperatures and pressures. This creates crystalline stone that has a wide range of crystals, from very fine small crystals to larger crystals. I believe that the marble that we're looking at here may be a Cherokee white marble with larger grains that are visible on the surface of the stone. Sometimes the grains aren't visible. A second type of stone that we find that is a calcareous stone, that is, when I say calcareous, I mean it's made up of calcium carbonate, and that is limestone. Here we see two limestone examples. These are both Woodsmen of the World monuments. They're shaped like logs or trees, and they honor a fraternal organization. Woodsman of the World monument on the left is suffering from biological growth with molds and with mosses that we see. These stones sometimes look like concrete or can be mistaken for concrete, but in reality they're carved limestone. Let's take a closer look at the limestone structure. These stones would be creams and grays to more white color of stone. They're a sedimentary stone. They're made up of materials that have deposited and then been under pressure over time. Often they're made up of seashells or fossils, and you can see fossils embedded in the stone. A third common stone found in cemeteries is granites. And granites range in color and shape. Granites are often thought of as a very durable, hard stone that lasts a long time. When we look at granites in the cemetery, we see colors that are reds to ochres to blacks. They often are, they may be mottled in color, that is, have different little color patches. Granites are silicate stones. They're a very hard stone, but we still see problems with granites in deterioration. Here we're looking at a close-up of a granite surface, and you see that you have some shiny flecks in there. That's because those are silicates that you're seeing there. And these stones, we found problems with granite stones in the West in particular. They're susceptible to hard water irrigation, where you get a deposit of minerals and salts on the stones that then can cause spalling of the surfaces. So we've looked at the types of materials that we found in the cemetery, and we've talked a little bit about the types of threats that we have in the cemetery. Now we're going to discuss the key tool in cemetery preservation, and that is the Cemetery Preservation Master Plan. And it's a good idea for people to have master plans. These are a roadmap that tell you where your cemetery is now and where you want it to be. And it is tailored to the needs of the individual cemeteries, so not all master plans are the same. Master plans include other documents in them, like documentation of the cemetery. You may have maps that you include. You will have historical documents that you may include in your master plan. And you know what stones you have and their conditions. You might have to have condition surveys in your documentation or your master plan. And we'll be talking more about condition surveys as we go along. You'll have a conservation treatment plan, and this is a guide, a little bit like a strategic plan, of what stones that you're going to work on first, and stones or monuments, and how you're going to progress. Another important aspect for the preservation master plan is your maintenance plan, and this tells you how you're going to deal with topics on a regular cycle. I know that many of you may have maintenance plans, but it's good to make sure that all of your maintenance staff know the plan and understand the routines and when things are going to happen in the cemetery. So let's go through each of these documents further. We're going to start with looking at documentation and condition surveys. Documentation can be as simple as someone with a notepad and paper going out and looking at the grave markers and determining what their conditions are at this time. We'll go to talk about a little bit about that more. It's important to use, you can use papers, you can use volunteers, you can use your maintenance staff, but you're going to try to get an idea of the condition of the grave markers in your cemetery. Other types of surveys might include historical documentation, that is looking at the primary resources that you have. You may have the evaluation of safety issues. That's when I mention safety issues, I'm not simply talking about the safety of your staff, but I'm talking about the safety of your visitors when they come here. If you have grave markers that are loose on their bases or that they are leaning, there is the potential for falls where very heavy stones can fall on your visitors and cause serious damage. And even there's been records of children being killed by grave markers that have fallen. So you want to make sure you understand the safety issues associated with the cemetery that you're in. Now, I know that many of our national cemeteries have smaller monuments that are in good shape, but that's still an issue. We want to make sure that we record have a record of those cemetery conditions because it's like a snapshot in time for us to know what this cemetery is like now and where we want it to go in the future. The types of surveys are taken for sources of information for developing work specifications. Perhaps you're one of those people that needs to put a new project in the Project Management Information System or the PMIS system, and you want to know, well, how much do you think it's going to cost if we have to clean every grave marker in our cemetery, or we need to undertake some real treatment of a major monument? The survey also provides us a source of information for developing those cost estimates. We want to talk a little bit about different types of survey forms. There are several types of forms that are available to us. Those forms include forms that can be gathered on a computer or forms that can be gathered by hand. There are forms available to you in the participants packet and the handouts that I gave you. In addition, not all forms serve all needs. And so let's take a look quickly at one type of form that might be used for surveys. This sample cemetery form is a form actually that the state of Texas uses. They gather a certain amount of information that's recorded, such as the name of the cemetery, the location of the reference grave site. You want to include any information on the person and the inscriptions. Just a note, when you're recording inscriptions, you want to record them just as they're written, even if they have spelling errors or odd errors, because that's a historical record. You want to record how the marker is associated with other objects. Is there a headstone, a gravestone, fencing associated with it? You want to understand the materials that are associated there and the orientation of the marker. You want to look at what conditions are there. Again, when I talk about cemetery survey forms, and in our next slide, we'll see different types of systems that can be used. Here, we see a gentleman who's using a geographic positioning system, a global positioning system, a GIS system, in association with a handheld device to study the grave markers in a cemetery. So you can go high-tech or you can go low-tech, but it's important to have some type of condition assessment. That said, I wouldn't spend all of the resources that you have solely on the condition assessment because you're going to need to have funds to actually do those treatments. Now, the first step in doing a condition assessment is that you need to locate or create a site map. And here we see American Cemetery in Natchitoches, Louisiana, with the map that we see on the left, and we see a detail on the right. Unfortunately, American Cemetery didn't have a map when we started, and so we had to create this map ourselves. Once you have a map, then you have to create your plan of attack. If you have a small cemetery, you may be able to survey all the grave markers, but in very large cemeteries, such as Laurel Hill Cemetery in Philadelphia, you would never have the manpower to be able to survey all of the cemetery. So you need to have a plan of attack. Dennis Montagna with the Northeast Regional Office worked with Laurel Hill Cemetery, and he chose to use a lottery method where they randomly numbered the grave sites and then they used computer generator to generate numbers of the sites that they would survey. They then sent teams of volunteers out to survey those specific spots and determined how the conditions of those represented the overall conditions of the cemetery. A second approach is here at Congressional Cemetery in Washington, D.C. Instead of using a random method and looking at different lots, they actually did a swath across the center of the cemetery and determined the conditions of those grave markers. Using that, they could then estimate how many grave markers they might have damaged throughout the cemetery, and they could estimate their cost based on the number of damaged or work-related issues in that swath. Now that you have a plan of attack and you have your map, the next aspect is to accurately record the details and record the descriptions. And again, it goes back to using those condition assessment forms. This information is useful to archaeologists, it's useful to genealogists, and it's useful to historians. After you've accurately documented and recorded the grave marker, the next aspect is to look at the conditions. And we have, it's important to make sure that you're using standard terminology when you're using any of these condition forms. You want to make sure that the people that you're working with are trained to understand what you mean when you say a stone is falling, that is, that you've got surface loss. So it's often very useful to use these forms, but to have training sessions prior to going out and doing the condition documentation. A good rule of thumb is to always make sure to photograph the grave markers that you're looking at. And sometimes you'll want to have additional information associated with that photograph. So you'll see here on the left that we're using an information board that gives the name and location of the cemetery. It provides a grayscale, a color scale, and a ruler so that you understand the scale in those photographs. You can take the photographs digitally, you can take the photographs by film. What we have done is both, and we have taken black and white photographs that we've had printed on fiber paper. That's very difficult to come by nowadays, but you can still find people that will print your pictures in black and white on fiber paper, and that will last you a long time. Now, what do we do that we have the map? We have the condition assessment, we have the accurate recording of the grave marker, and we have the photographs. Well, you can just simply file those, or you can put them into what's known as a geographic information system or a database that will then link your photographs, your images to a specific site in the cemetery. And this is a very useful tool for both locating grave markers when people come to visit and say, where is my parents buried, or my great-grandparents. It's also very useful for you when you're trying to determine what your work plan is going to be for the year. One other word that I'd like to talk about here is that you want to incorporate your community in the efforts. And some people groan when I say that you can get volunteers from your community to help you. You really can, because your volunteers in your community are the people who are going to care the most about your cemetery. And when they care about the cemetery, they're going to see that you have the resources to take care of your cemetery. So when you're involving volunteers, however, you're going to want to make sure that you provide appropriate volunteer training. We train our volunteers on the methods that we use to conduct a condition survey. We also make sure they're trained in safety, because in some of the types of cemeteries that we're working on, we may find fire ants, snakes, different types of venomous creatures that can hurt us. So we make sure that our volunteers are well trained. Now let's talk a little bit about, now that we've had our condition survey, why don't we talk about the next step, which is the conservation plan. And these conservation plans will often involve professionals that you're going to contract from outside. They're going to help identify conservation needs, particularly with issues of things like emergency stabilizations of monuments, safety for both you, the worker, and your public, and landscape stabilization. Then you're going to deal with making priorities and then undertaking field work. So let's look at identifying conservation needs. Those needs are those objects that they may be historically significant, or they may be in a location that's very visually, has a high visual impact on your cemetery. If you have a broken grave marker, or a grave marker that doesn't look so good, that's at the very front of the cemetery or in a prominent place, that might be something that you would prioritize highly. You also have to consider on how much work you can do, which is a lot, and how much you're going to have to bring in professionals to help you. You're going to be seeking professional assistance, and that assistant may be conservators who specialize in the conservation of cemeteries or stones. It may be master masons that understand how to work with stone and carve stone. There's a wide range of people that you want to involve. You bring in your professionals, you identify your conservation needs. For example, the needs that you might have on mausoleums like this are going to be very different than the needs you might have in a national cemetery with very uniform stones. Let's then talk a little bit about how do we set our priorities once we've done all this surveying. Well, the priorities and needs of a national cemetery are going to be different than the priorities and needs of a private cemetery. You are going to want to establish those priorities based on your mission, based on your visitors. You're going to always start with looking at safety issues first, and that includes the safety of workers and the safety of your visitors and public. You may want to deal with those visually prominent monuments first, and then move to dealing with your historically significant monuments. So we have our priorities in place, we've done all this work, and now we prepare to undertake the field work. And field work may be usually you're going to start with issues like dealing with resetting and realignment of your grave markers. If you have tilting graves or graves that are broken, you would then look at next at what types of repairs do you need to make, or is this simply something as simple as cleaning? The third aspect of your overall master plan is your maintenance plan. And your maintenance plan is going to have written protocols for your day-to-day events, such as your mowing and your weed removal. You're going to want to make sure that all of the people that work in the cemetery are familiar with your maintenance plan. It may include periodic treatment of fertilizers for grass or biocides to remove growth on stone. There's also the issue of biocides in removing weeds and higher order plants, and that can be complicated, Often we turn to Roundup, but Roundup can be detrimental to stone because it leaves soluble salts. In our maintenance plan, we're going to have long-term plan of where we want the cemetery to be. We're going to have issues for how regularly we inspect the stones, and we're going to have education and training built in. So let's just summarize what we've talked about to this point. And thus far, we've tried to understand the threats to a cemetery and grave markers before undertaking action. We want to remember that a master plan is the roadmap that shows us where the cemetery is now as a snapshot in time and where we want it to be going. And we want to help create a master plan that is tailored to the individual cemetery and considering many issues. Now, the last thing that we need to talk about before undertaking treatments in the cemetery is that of a conservation or preservation ethic. That is, those things that we want to keep in our mind when we're getting ready to do work. First and foremost, anything that we do, we want to do no harm. If we don't know whether it's going to be harmful or not, it's better to do nothing at all. We want to respect and retain the fabric and the original material. We want to minimize our impact. We want to understand the chemicals, our treatments that we're going to use. We want to be authentic. We don't want to change our monuments in a way that leads one to believe it's younger than it is or it's different than what it is. We need to be able to identify those repairs that we've done and to document our activities while we do them, and to maintain and protect the resource. This is a good place for us now to ask if there's any questions on the topics that we've covered thus far.
I have a question.
Yes.
John Hyder, Lincoln's Home, Springfield, Illinois. Where do you get a map to create a cemetery outline? Is there computer programs available for that?
Well, yes, you can enter, Jason, and you might want to address this. You can use CAD programs.
You can use programs as complicated as ArcGIS, which is a GIS database system for doing mapping. Also, there are a lot of freeware programs out and programs designed specifically for doing cemetery mapping. A good resource to look at programs might be the American Cemetery Magazine. It's a magazine that comes out monthly about cemetery maintenance. It's mostly designed for new cemeteries, but there are always ads, and they do a yearly review of software. That might be a good place to look. And also, I've seen very, very successful mapping done with something as simple as taking a giant grid of surveyor's tape, laying over the whole cemetery, and people drawing each section in that grid to make a very successful map of a cemetery. So there's a wide range of materials that are available, from very technical to very simple, even using tape measures and graph paper, that seem to work really well. It depends on the size of your site and how complex you want to go with it.
And another aspect of that is that you can use Google Maps online now to get an aerial view of your location, and then simply take those and start drawing from those to give you a map.
So hopefully that helped you answer your question a little bit, John. Is there any other questions? Okay, well, let's move on to the next session in our TEL course here. And what we're going to talk about is some of the physical hands-on treatments that we can do, some simple things that have a big impact on the cemetery, and hopefully things that our participants are looking forward to doing. So the first thing we want to sort of ask ourselves is, who is taking care of Grandpa's grave? Who are the ones that are doing the work? And once we've asked that question, should Grandpa be worried? So let's look at some of the issues that we can address and some of the questions that we might have. And the first thing we want to talk about is cleaning issues. What is the reason that we're cleaning the monument? And this is really important. The answer to that question may differ wildly, and this may be the reason that we choose different cleaners or maybe even different methods. So are we cleaning it for soiling or staining? Do we have gypsum crust that Mary talked about earlier? Do we have biological growth, or do we have vandalism and graffiti? And we'll sort of go over each of these issues in some detail. So one of the biggest reasons that cemeteries are cleaned currently is for readability. Genealogy is the fastest growing pastime in America. We've seen a huge resurgence in the popularity of cemeteries and people visiting cemeteries, and this is really the reason. There's a lot of people out doing a lot of genealogy. The really important thing to note about genealogists, if you are cleaning a headstone to get that genealogical information, it's important to clean the entire headstone, not just the epitaph information. Anytime we clean a headstone, no matter how well it's done, you do disrupt the surface somewhat. So we don't want to keep cleaning just that epitaph over and over. We're going to clean the entire grave marker. And this is a good time, once it's been cleaned, to do some of the documentation that Mary talked about, so that maybe we don't have to keep cleaning it as much in the future, that we've got that epitaph, we've got that information off of it. Another reason for cleaning may just be soiling. Maybe you've got dirt splashed up from rainwater or particulate matter that's come from wind or from the trees. If you're looking at something as simple as soiling, maybe a very simple cleaner, water, a lot of times will get general soiling off with a soft bristle brush, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Another reason for cleaning might be staining. Now, for example, in this slide we have some metallic staining. We can see that 2 iron pins were once installed in this marble headstone, and in that the iron has migrated out to the surface and caused some metallic staining. Now, this is also seen a lot of times in relationship to bronze pins or bronze plaques. Now, this is an issue that may require consultation with a conservator or a professional that might need to come in and do some advanced poulticing techniques to remove that staining. Another reason that we do a lot of cleaning is before gypsum crust and deterioration like this. And Dr. Striegel talked a little bit earlier about gypsum crust. Here again, this might be an issue that you want to consult a professional conservator. You have to be very careful when removing that dark black deposit, because what's behind it a lot of times is a very soft, very fragile surface. And what you'll get is this sort of soaping effect, like a worn away bar of soap, as we can see in this little girl's face from Louisville. Just the rapid deterioration once that black crust is removed. The material underneath it is very soft, very fragile. Another reason that we do a lot of cleaning, especially in the South where we're working currently and all along the East Coast, is from biodeterioration. A lot of times biological growth, be it lichen or algae or fungi that are attaching themselves to the stone, makes it very unsightly. It makes it hard to read. A lot of these biological growths can actually feed on the stone and help break it down. So this may be a time that we want to talk about biocides, and we'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute. But biocides are a treatment, an additive to a cleaner that actually kills that biological growth and helps it come off. And we'll talk more about those in just a minute. Another big reason to clean cemeteries is vandalism. Now, unfortunately, we see this all across the U.S. We see this all across the world. The big thing with vandalism, if you have vandalism, this really needs to be brought up to the forefront. This needs to be an emergency issue that has to be addressed immediately, because vandalism has a tendency to bring on more vandalism. There's a perception that obviously no one cares about the cemetery, the graffiti or the vandalism has stayed, so people come on and bring more of it. It's really important also to remove that as quick as possible. A lot of times these are racially or politically motivated, so we don't want to help these people get their message across. We want to try to remove that as quickly as possible. And that might be a good time to consult a professional to talk about paint removal from stone. Now at this time we're going to take a quick break. before we do that, though, do we have questions on anything that we've covered? Maybe cleaning issues, documentation, mapping. We had a great question from John earlier. Love to have some more. Before we take a break, do we have any more questions at this time?
Yes, this is Michelle Curran from the Midwest Regional Office. I'd like you to explain sugaring.
Sure. In the one slide you saw, it was sort of on the left-hand side, we had a little bit of sugaring in that photograph. Sugaring is caused sometimes by acid rain, but usually it's harsh maintenance practices or harsh cleaners used in the past. And what causes sugaring is, particularly in marbles where we see the most sugaring, also in sandstones, a common reason for sugaring, almost out of there, is things like salt-laden cleaners like bleach. And what they do is they go in, get absorbed into the marble. As the liquid evaporates, the salts are left behind, they recrystallize, which grow inside the pore structure of the stone, pushing apart the internal structure. And what you have is small flakes of the stone, the crystals actually falling off. And we call it sugaring because you can run your hand down it and you get sugar. And it feels like sugar, it looks like sugar. That's actually the stone coming apart, it's losing connection with its boundaries, and the little crystals are actually coming away from it. If you have very severe sugaring, there are treatments that you can do to help rebind the stone. There are consolidation treatments, and this might be something you would want to consult with a conservator on doing consolidation treatments if you have very severe sugaring on a grave.
The other aspect of that is that when you're using different chemicals, or if you have air pollution, that attacks the grain boundaries or the binder that keeps the marble together. And so you want to make sure that the products that you're using aren't going to have that chemical attack effect. Also, you've mentioned that you see this with bleach. You can also see this if people have come out and mistakenly used acids like muriatic acid on cleaning the stone.
Right, we'll talk a little bit more about some of those harsh cleaners and how they have that effect after the break when we talk about more about cleaners. So hopefully that answers your question, or at least helped a little bit. Do we have any more questions? Okay, well, there'll be plenty of time for questions further into the broadcast. At this time, we're going to take a 10-minute break. While we're taking this break, maybe think of some questions, stretch your legs, that sort of thing. And we'll be watching the Eagle Cam here at NCTC, so we'll see you in a minute. Well, hopefully you enjoyed the last 10-minute break of our eaglet sleeping after he was much more active earlier as he ate the half the fish that we see in the nest with him, but after lunch he seems to have passed out, so he was having a lot of fun earlier, but hopefully you enjoyed the 10-minute break and thought of some questions and some of the issues that we're going to talk about next. So we're going to go on to more about cleaning issues. We're going to start with page 16 of the participant's guide if you want to follow along. We're going to talk about what are some of the considerations regarding cleaning methods. One of the things we have to think about is acceleration of deterioration. Before we clean a headstone or monument, is the treatment we're going to do going to accelerate any deterioration that's already there? Are we going to have a loss of original materials? Now, the biggest thing that we talk about is to do no harm, and Mary talked about some of the ethical issues earlier, so we really have to keep that in mind. What is the long-term stability of the monument? Is anything that we're going to do going to affect its long-term stability? For example, if we're using a lot of water, is it too far into the winter to be doing this cleaning treatment? May our cleaning treatment have negative effects on the stability of this monument by introducing this much water? That might be one example. Another thing that we want to think about is what are the long-term effects of any of the cleaners that we're using? We want to make sure that the cleaners that we're using have been tested in the past, have been used for a while. If it's a new cleaner, has anyone done any testing on it to see what the long-term effects may be? Always want to keep that in mind. Now that we've sort of touched on that, we're going to talk about the types of cleaning that we can do. Now, one of the main types that we'll talk about and is done is chemical treatments. Also, of course, there's mechanical, and there's good and bad with both of those, and we'll discuss that. And then, of course, the most common probably is the combination of the two. So when we talk about chemical cleaners, let's look at some of the acceptable types and the unacceptable types. And acceptable types would be detergents. Now, this isn't your dish detergent. This isn't your laundry detergent. Those a lot of times contain phosphates and salts, and these are things that have negative effects on porous stone. We're looking at mild, gentle, non-ionic detergents, and we'll cover that more in a minute. We're also looking at cleaners that contain a surfactant, ones that contain solvents, ones that contain biocides. We mentioned that earlier. We'll talk more about that again. And also intermittent water misting is a good, acceptable cleaning method, and just water in general. Unacceptable are going to be those salt-based cleaners, such as bleach, and that's what's going to cause that sugaring that we see. And we'll cover that a little bit more briefly. Also, some of the cleaning methods is mechanical cleaning. So what's acceptable and unacceptable with this? Acceptable would be low-pressure pressure washing. Now, what we consider low pressure is something less than 300 psi. Now, keep in mind your average house pressure is coming out at about 100 psi, so we're only talking about 3 times of your average hose pressure. We'll talk and look at some pictures of the negative effects of higher pressure psi. Also, mechanical agitation using soft bristle brushes, and we'll show a video a little bit of cleaning a monument using this technique. And when we talk about soft bristle brushes, we're talking about natural bristle brushes or nylon, but things that are definitely soft and acceptable for historic materials. Unacceptable always is going to be sandblasting, high pressure washing, grinders, and wire brushes, and we'll touch on each of those as we go along. Also, what we want to talk about, we sort of talked about some of the acceptable methods. What are the do's and don'ts of cleaning? Now, the don't remove original surfaces, and that goes back to that ethical issue that Mary brought up earlier about trying to do no harm and retain as much of the original fabric as possible. We don't want to use bleach or other salt-laden cleaners. We don't want to use high-pressure pressure washes. We don't want to use sandblasting or harsh mechanical methods, such as power tools. And of course, we don't want to use strong acids and bases. We want to stay away from uric acids, hydrochloric acids, sulfuric acids. These are things that have been used in the past, and occasionally they pop up where people will say, oh, muriatic acid works great. And this does a lot of harmful effects to the stone by removing that initial first layer of material. So one of the things that we want to talk about, the nevers of cleaning, is we never want to use wire brushes. Now this is something that we hadn't really seen before until fairly recent, in the last couple of years. It's been broadcast on the internet, and people have talked about on some of the genealogy forums using grinders with wire cut brushes or drills with wire brushes to clean monuments. Now, of course, this does a measurable amount of damage. This is very bad for historic stone. It actually rips that surface off. It grinds away that important information, that important cultural material. So we want to stay away from grinders or sanders or wire brushes of any kind when working with historic stone. Another thing that we want to stay away from is the pressure washing. Now in this photograph we see here, this stone has not been cleaned recently when this photograph was taken. This stone was cleaned about 2 years prior to this photograph, and what you see is actually those white marks are where the stone has been gouged out. That surface is deeper than the face of the stone, so it's weathering at a different rate. Commercial pressure washers usually run about 1,500 to 2,000, even up to 3,000 psi. This is way too much for historic stone. You can actually carve marble at that sort of pressure. So be very careful and stay away from those. Another thing that we want to talk about is those salt-laden cleaners, such as bleach. Other thing to be careful with salt-laden cleaners is a lot of the modern granite cleaners that are carried by granite monument catalogs are actually salt-based. So you want to look at the label, you want to look at the MSDS, and that's the Material Safety Data Sheet, and we'll talk about those again in a minute. But on that, we'll list the chemical composition. You'll be able to see if it has any sodiums, any chlorines, any chlorides. Look to see on that sheet if there's any salts contained. Now in that last slide that we saw, this is a good example of the negative effects of bleach cleaner. The family actually told us that photograph of the stone that you see on the right there, and the top half of that stone is laying in pieces in front of it. This was a stone that was cleaned on a regular basis with Clorox bleach. They came out, cleaned it about once a week, once a month, something like that. And you can see how delaminated this stone is, how sugared it is, and that it's almost a complete failure because of these. And we talked a little bit earlier when we had that question from the audience, and thank you for that. We talked about how that works by letting those salt crystals grow inside it, and that pushes apart the stone. All right, so we've sort of talked about the don'ts. Let's talk a little bit about the do's. You want to do no harm. You want to select the gentlest cleaning method to accomplish the task. And this goes back to that question that we asked ourselves earlier, why are we cleaning the stone? Was it just to remove some soiling? Maybe just water will work. Was it to remove biological growth? Maybe we want to look at something with biocide. So keep that in mind. Select the gentlest means. You also want to perform small tests, and we'll look at a slide of this in a minute. And you also saw a slide of this earlier in Dr. Striegel's talk. The small test of different cleaners, especially if you're going to clean a large area in the cemetery or the whole cemetery, you might want to start with a few test patches to decide what cleaner you're going to use on the overall project. We want to follow the manufacturer's recommendations. These are usually on the label. A lot of times you can get them in instruction sheets. We also want to follow the manufacturer's safety guidance. And we'll cover that again in just a couple of slides. And so we want to exercise patience. Keep in mind these stones didn't get dirty overnight. They're probably not going to come clean, especially the more worn ones or the ones with heavier soiling or staining. They're not going to come clean in 10 or 15 minutes. So patience is an important issue when doing any conservation work. So what we're going to talk about now is safety and handling. And this goes back to that MSDS that I talked about, the Material Safety Data Sheet. Now these are available for any cleaner, available from the place that you purchase them or available from the manufacturer. And they can usually be contacted in a 1-800 number or on a website. And what an MSDS sheet is going to show you is what personal protective equipment needs to be worn when using this. So it may have goggles, glasses, gloves, that sort of thing. This is also really important to train your staff, if you've got maintenance staff or even volunteers, on this personal protective equipment. Speaking of equipment, we want to have the soft bristle brushes, spray bottles, lots of personal protective equipment available. Sometimes it's also good to have spray bottles well labeled of your cleaner and spray bottles well labeled of just water to keep that wet. We'll talk about why that's important. So when you're looking at a choice of cleaners, you want to consider the gentlest method available. And for basic cleaning, consider something with a non-ionic detergent, something with a neutral pH similar to that of the stone if possible. For example, a neutral pH is that of 7, but a pH of marble is about 9.5 to 10. So you may want to pick a cleaner that has a pH similar to that of the marble if that's what you're cleaning. And you may also want to look at a product that contains a biocide. Now, one important thing to consider if you are using a biocide is it takes a few days for it to completely take effect. So directly afterwards, your stone is definitely going to look cleaner, but it's going to look a lot cleaner 4 or 5 days down the road as that biocide takes effect and kills the biological growth off that's contained on that stone. So if we look at the next slide, what you'll see is these small test patches that we talked about. And this is really important to look at different cleaners that maybe have been recommended or meet the guidelines that we've talked about. Come back. There may be a color change. There may be a lightening due to the biocide. So you might want to do this test patch, wait a week, come back, really see which of these cleaners did a good job, see if there's any negative effects that you can see, any salt deposition, that sort of thing, which is probably unlikely, before you go on to do more cleaning. So we talked a little bit about the cleaners. Let's actually talk about the methods behind the application of the cleaners and the actual cleaning of a headstone. One of the most important things is we always want to soak the stone with water before the cleaning. Stone is incredibly porous. It absorbs a lot of water. So we want to make sure this stone is completely saturated before we apply the cleaner. And this is also important to keep the cleaner right on the surface. That actually saves us money. We use less cleaner that way. It actually saves us time. All the work we're doing stays localized right on the surface, which is where we want to do the cleaning. And also any harmful effects that the cleaner may have, we keep that out of the interior of the stone by having the interior of the stone full of water and keeping that cleaner right on the surface. We want to start cleaning the stone from the bottom and working our way up. This actually minimizes streaking. On a small VA stone like in the photograph, we're not going to see a big difference, but if you work toward larger monuments, you will see a big difference in minimizing streaking and decreasing the amount of work if we actually start from the bottom and work toward the top. And small circular motion is always good. There's no scientific basis behind that. It's strictly a personal preference. I find it gets inside of incised lettering and around raised lettering much better to use that small circular motion. And also lots of water. If you're working at a site that doesn't have running water, bring lots of 55-gallon drums, backpack sprayers, whatever you can to bring water to the site. But you want to make sure to get it wet first, rinse it, and to keep it moist at all times, and that'll minimize any negative effects or staining. So now that we've sort of covered some of these issues, we're going to show a short video presentation of actually some cleaning methods. We're cleaning a stone in the video, and we'll come back with questions that you may have about that. Hello. In this video, we'll be showing you the basic procedures for cleaning a stone grave marker. There are two things to remember. First, it's always exercise personal safety, and the second is to do no harm to the grave marker itself. Stone is a very durable material. However, keep in mind that stone can be affected by pollution and weathering over its lifetime. So exercise caution before proceeding with any treatments. Now before we get started, let's briefly go over what not to do. We don't want to do anything that will remove or damage the original surface of the stone. We never recommend the use of bleach or other salt-laden cleaners. It is also never advisable to use any strong acids or bases. Finally, you don't want to use any harsh mechanical devices such as sandblasting, high-pressure power washers, or power tools such as grinders or drills equipped with wire brushes. All of these methods can damage the grave marker. Let's look at some damage that has resulted from well-intending people cleaning with poor techniques. Okay, so now that we know what to avoid, let's get started and set down the ground rules for how to proceed. In keeping with our do no harm policy, it's important to select the gentlest cleaning method possible to accomplish your task. The first thing we need is to select our tools before we proceed with the cleaning instructions. Always locate your nearest water supply. It takes a lot of water to properly clean stone. If your cemetery does not have running water, then it is important to bring barreled or bucketed water to the site with you. Also, it is good to have your selected cleaner in a convenient spray bottle. As for the brushes, you always want to use soft bristle, either a natural or a synthetic. The general guideline is that if your brush is safe for cleaning the hood of your car, then it will work well for historic stone. For chemical cleaning, acceptable products are non-ionic detergents, solvents, surfactants, biocides, and intermediate water misting. When looking for the right type of cleaning products to use, try to find a non-ionic detergent or a product containing biocide with either a neutral pH or a pH similar to that of the stone you're cleaning. We can learn more about the cleaners by reading the product literature and the material safety data sheets. Alright, so let's get started. In keeping with our do no harm policy, we're going to make some small tests to assure we're not going to damage the stone. We have evaluated the selected cleaners and we like the properties of this particular one for this stone. There doesn't appear to be any damage caused by the cleaner and the appearance is satisfactory, so we're good to continue. Now we're going to want to soak the stone before we begin. Stone is a very porous material and will quickly absorb any cleaner that is applied to it. By soaking the stone first, it allows the cleaner to stay on the surface of the stone. This minimizes the impact of the stone and maximizes the cleaner's effects. Once it's wet, we start cleaning from the bottom and slowly work our way up to the top. Starting from the bottom of the stone minimizes streaking and staining. We're going to want to use small circular motions as we go. This helps to get in all of the crevices. Sometimes it's important to switch brushes to meet the situation. On stones with a lot of biological growth or heavy soiling, you may need to repeat the cleaning methods more than once. If you are using a cleaner that contains a biocide, keep in mind that the stone will continue to lighten over the next few days. Also, as we said before, we're going to use a lot of water. Make sure you keep the stone rinsed at all times. And there you have it. These procedures are not only useful for general cleaning, but can also be performed before more complicated repairs or conservation work takes place. Finished cleaning this headstone. We've allowed it to dry overnight to show that it will lighten when it's dry. On this particular grave marker, we've used a biocidal cleaner that will continue to lighten over the next few days. Now that you've watched this video on the basic procedures for cleaning a stone grave marker, remember to always exercise personal safety and to do no harm to the marker itself. And good luck. Welcome back. Hopefully that reinforced some of the things that we talked about. One thing I did want to bring up, and then I'd like to see if there's any questions out there, is in the video we're using a biocide, and we've talked a lot about biocides, and these are things that usually contain a quaternary ammonia compound. One really important thing that's come up recently in a lot of calls and emails that I've gotten that I wanted to address, sometimes, not always, but occasionally when using a biocide on a stone that has a lot of biological growth, the biological growth may actually off-put a color trying to combat the fact that it's being poisoned. This is not harmful to stone in any way and actually will rinse away with water, so just sort of ignore it and keep cleaning. But I've had a lot of frantic calls in the past few months from conservators and maintenance staff who are cleaning with a biocide whose entire stone turns hot pink or purple or yellow while they're cleaning it. And this is actually a good thing. It means it's killing that biological growth, and this isn't harmful to the stone in any way. Just make sure you keep it rinsed. So at this time, do we have any questions about cleaning or about any of the things that we talked about before the break? Documentation or surveying, any of that?
Hi, this is
Jim
Jerry
Small at
from
Andrew
Zion
Johnson National
Park and
Cemetery. How
Park.
does vinegar play as a cleaning agent?
Hold on a second. Let's start with Andrew Johnson because I missed the other person, but I definitely want to get back to your question. But let's start with Andrew Johnson, and that was, how does vinegar work as a cleaning agent? You want to take that, Dr. Striegel?
Well, vinegar has an acidic pH, and it can actually damage the stone. So I wouldn't recommend anything that is acidic in nature for the stone. I would not recommend products like Windex or ammonia or anything like that.
And also, we right before that, we had a lady with a question. Can we get that again, please?
Sure. My name is Terry, and I'm from Zion National Park.
Hey, Carrie, what's your question?
We were talking about not damaging the original surface. I'm assuming that is like how brick has a fire skin, or if it's polished marble, that kind of a thing?
Yeah, actually, it's exactly the same. Since natural stone hasn't been fired like brick, it's a little bit different. It doesn't have that definitive edge surface like a brick does. But yeah, that surface can definitely weather and harden over time. So it does have a harder exterior due to just natural weathering over a period of time. And yes, polished stones, especially granites and marbles, things that take a high polish, that exterior surface is somewhat sealed due to the polishing process. So that is somewhat of a protective coating. And once that's deteriorated from either bad cleaning or harsh cleaning methods, we leave a rougher surface, which leaves more room for biological growth to grow and to grab onto, and causes further deterioration down the road.
I wanted to make one comment about the vinegar again, and that is that when I say it's not necessarily a good idea, I work a lot with the calcareous stones, which are limestones and marbles, and they're going to be more sensitive to acids than if you're dealing with a stone like a granite stone or a stone that's made with silicates.
So hopefully that answered some of your questions. Any more questions?
Yeah, this is Joe from Saratoga, and you say to always wet the stone, but also follow manufacturer's instructions. But the D2 product, says do not wet the stone first. What do you recommend?
Sure, and you're absolutely right. That's a very common cleaner that's used a lot, and the manufacturer recommendations on that do say that. I still would go ahead and wet the stone for all the reasons that we talked about earlier. Especially since, sometimes we don't know all of the effects that the cleaner might have on the stone. I'm still a big fan of wetting the stone first to keep that cleaning action right there on the surface. I've used a lot of biocides such as D2 where I always wet the stone. I've had no, decrease in their quality or their action. I don't think that takes away from their cleaning properties any. I definitely would still recommend cleaning. So that's a good thing to point out, that usually follow the manufacturer's recommendation. That might be an exception. I still prefer to get the stone wet before applying any cleaning agents.
Now, we've mentioned D2 Biological Solution, which is a product by Cathedral Stone. There are some, that is a biocide that contains quaternary ammonium compounds, and they're very good on bacteria. Other similar products might be something like BioWash, which is sold by Proseco, which is out of California, or there's also a product named Modec. All of these products work on similar, have biocidal properties based on quaternary ammonium salts. Now the key is that we have done research on a variety of cleaners, and with these cleaners we do recommend a thorough rinsing afterwards. We would not be comfortable spraying the cleaner on and just leaving it. And there have been people in cemetery preservation that have recommended using one of these types of cleaners by simply spraying them on and leaving them on. We wouldn't recommend that.
Other questions? Okay, we'll move on to the third part of the presentation, and by all means, if you think of something else, we'll have plenty of time at the end for more questions. So what we want to cover now is we've talked about cleaning, which is sort of the most dramatic effect that you can do for cemetery conservation, but probably one of the most important would be resetting. And this is something that we see typically. Stones get knocked over by vandalism or just due to high winds or ice jacking. That's where water gets underneath them, freezes, and actually allows the stone to slide off. We also get stones that just slump from natural weathering of the soil around them and erosion, that sort of thing. And I just want to point out I'm a big fan of this photograph on the right-hand side. This is actually juveniles in a juvenile delinquent detention center. They're actually being trained to reset stones after being incarcerated for vandalism. One of my favorite pictures there I've used for years. But what we want to talk about with resetting is the different types of resetting and the different types of monuments styles that are out there and the different bases. And the first one we're going to look at is ground supported. This is just a buried stone. This is probably the most common. Also stones that fit into a slotted base, and also stones that have a stacked base. And these can be very simple to very complex, and we'll go over each of these. So the first one we talk about is sort of this ground supported stone. And this is what we typically think about when we think about our national cemeteries and our Park Service veteran cemeteries. These are stones that are simply supported by the ground packed around them. There's no extra base underneath that. There's no foundation other than usually the ground. Now, one thing that's used a lot of times is proper drainage, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. But also in this slide that we see on the right-hand side, each of these VA stones has a band of color around the bottom, and these have just recently gone through a raise and realign project. That's where they actually raise all of them to the same level and line them front to back, and that's what has caused that staining, and that's will be easily removed with a mild detergent and water, just to remove that dirt line from them. So one of the things we want to look at with the ground supported is the most important thing is to get the stone plumb and level. That's level and plumb to the earth. Sometimes they've sunk or leaned because of improper drainage. So one thing you might want to consider is a small but sharp stone put underneath it. I don't recommend pea gravel. A lot of times these sort of have a ball bearing effect that allow the stone to slide and move around. So a small but sharp gravel works well to help drainage. And in this photograph, you see a raise and realign project at a national cemetery where they're using string lines to get everything to the right height and level. And then, of course, good ground compaction to hold them in place. The next type of stone that we want to talk about is one with a slotted base. And this is exactly like it sounds. You have a base that has a whole slot cut into it that the headstone actually sits down into. And this is very similar to, in woodworking, what's called a mortise and tenon. And we'll talk in the next few slides about how to reset that. And one way you can do it is, of course, the most important thing is to stabilize and level that base. A good foundation is the key essential to getting a monument to stand and last over time. So you want to stabilize and level that base first, and we may need gravel for drainage if that is an issue, and semi-high gravel we just talked about. From inside this base, we want to clean out that slot. A lot of times you have a lot of biological growth, a lot of dirt, soiling that has built up in there over the years. And in doing that, you also want to look to see if there's any failed adhesive epoxies or mortars that are left behind from either the original placement or failed repair attempts over time. And you want to get all of those out. And that might just be simply by washing it, getting those out, or using a very sharp small chisel to remove any hard mortars like Portland cement that might have been used in the past and have failed. The next thing we want to do is, once we've leveled this, you want to remove any existing adhesive and mortar, but from the bottom of the headstone. Just like in our base, a lot of times on the bottom of the headstone we have these left. And this is a really good time to clean the headstone. Wash the base and the headstone, like we talked about earlier. Remove all this failed material. And then a very, very important step that a lot of times gets overlooked is we want to dry fit that headstone into the base before we move further. We want to make sure that that headstone fits properly into that base before we apply a new mortar or a new adhesive. This is really important. I myself have reset ones in the past where we had a perfectly good looking base, a perfectly good looking headstone, got everything removed, got both of them cleaned, went to do a dry fit and realized they didn't even belong together. They didn't fit together at all. That unfortunately you had a headstone that was leaned against a base that was just empty, and someone thought they looked like a good fit. So that's really important. Another thing when removing that initial headstone, if you are taking it out of the base, to keep in mind which direction it faced before you do the resetting to keep that properly aligned. Once we've done this, once we've done our dry fit and everything fits in, then we want to come back in and with an adhesive. And a lot of times this can just be a lime mortar or a grout. And we never want to use Portland cement. This is too harsh, too hard for our historic stone. This causes a place that water can't move through. It also is something that it takes a lot of effort if the stone ever is in need of being reset to remove that Portland cement. So we highly recommend using a lime-based grout or mortar, and this can be poured into the slot before the stone is put into place. And also lead wedges can be used to help stabilize the stone, and this may be put under the stone. Maybe you have a headstone that has broken off at an angle or has a piece missing from it. You might want to put some lead under it to help get it level in that slot. And also lead wedges can be put around the stone to help stabilize it. And lead wedges are available from most monument catalogs and monument supply companies. Once we've put our lime mortar in, we've set our headstone in, the next thing that we really want to do is make sure we stabilize it. We want to make sure this stone doesn't move any while it's setting. If it does move, it gets rocked while that mortar is trying to set. We break that initial bond that we've made there, and then that's going to weaken that joint later. So we want to make sure to clamp this up to support it anyway while it dries, and this could take a day or two. Once we've done that, once it's set, then you want to clean off any excess mortar. Hopefully you've had a little bit of mortar that has pushed up from around the base. We can take our trowel and just wipe this off, take a soft sponge, wipe off any excess that's gotten onto the stone. If there are any voids, let's say you didn't get mortar to push out in all the areas and you have some voids, you're going to need to take some of that same mortar and pack back into the voids and fill them. This is going to keep an area free of water. If we have any voids, water has a tendency to pool up in there, and we could have negative effects with freeze-thaw cycles. Also, this is a great place that Biological growth and higher order plants like small ferns and mosses have a tendency to want to grow in, and we want to keep that from happening because then that could push the stone apart later. So now we've talked a little bit about slotted bases. We'll move on to stacked bases. And this is something that we see a lot, and it can be anything as simple as a 2-foot tall child stone with a single stacked base up to very large monuments. Usually we have multiple sections that are smaller that are all stacked on top of each other, making the overall monument. These may or may not have any reinforcements, and when I say reinforcements, usually what we have is metallic pins, and we'll talk about those in just a minute. And these can really range widely in size, like I mentioned earlier, from very small to very large monuments. When you have the large monuments, one thing that you may need at this time is rigging or lifting equipment. You may have to get these involved to move the pieces apart. It's really important to remember that each base is equally important. The foundation is the most important. It has to be plumb and level. It has to be completely stable before moving on to the next base. And you're going to have to do the same procedure multiple times as you stack each of the bases back on top of each other. Now, once we've got the bases apart, this is the time we want to clean them. We want to remove any of that failed mortar that we talked about. And for example, we see Dom in this photograph. We have to remove any of that failed mortar sometimes with a small hammer and chisel, very sharp chisel. Be careful to not damage the stone, but to remove that failed adhesive, that failed mortar. And then we want to clean the entire stone, but paying particular attention to the surface that we've just cleaned the mortar from. A lot of times you have a very dry, dusty surface, and this is going to keep our new mortar from setting on it. And also a lot of biological growth has a tendency to build up in there, so we want to make sure to clean that off. When putting it back together, we want to use, again, a lime-based mortar or that grout. A lot of times lead spacers are used, and lead spacers keep the two bases apart from each other. The weight of the bases have a tendency to push down and push all your mortar out. You need that mortar in there to provide a cushion and also to keep water from getting in between these areas. So the lead spacers actually help keep it a good even space so that the mortar will stay in place. And the lead is recommended over nylon. A lot of modern companies are using nylon spacers, but the lead is actually self-leveling under pressure, so that's a good thing. But once you do this, if you have any mortar that is pushed out, just like we talked about the slotted bases, you can remove that and then pack back anywhere you might have any voids. So if we look at the next slide, a setting compound can also be used, and we'll watch a short video in a second where a setting compound is actually used in resetting that monument. And a setting compound is an elastomeric putty that's available for monument catalogs and monument dealers. And this actually does not penetrate into the stone. It's not an epoxy, and it actually can be removed and taken back up if need be later. And we want to make sure that the seam is completely filled to prevent any water intrusion, and that'll prevent any damage from that ice jacking that we talked about. If we have a stack base that has reinforcement, we talked about those metallic pins earlier, we're going to need to remove those. So let's talk briefly about those. Stack pins with bases, usually the pins were iron. These are the ones that cause us the most trouble. These are the ones that rust and expand and actually will push the stone apart. Galvanized steel, once this galvanized coating is worn off, we have that rust problem again. Also bronze, copper pipe, and aluminum is a more modern thing. The bronze and the copper pipe, we don't have that expansion issue, but what we do have is metallic staining that comes along with that. So if we go on to the next slide, what you'll see is some damage on the left-hand side from a monument that had two metallic pins that have actually pushed out and blown the stone apart. These original pins may have been set with lead or sulfur, adhesive, concrete, or a mortar. And these are all things that we're going to have to remove to get this pin out. The original pins usually are damaged or corroded. These have to be removed. These can be removed, for example, with a small drill bit, drilling all the way around it. A lot of times with vice grips you can remove these, or also, as you'll see in the video, with coring bits. And we want to stay as close to the pin as we can to keep away from damaging the stone. And new pins can be reset the same way they were historically. They can be reset with a soft lime mortar or grout, a setting compound, an epoxy if you have them up high enough. And also they can be reset with lead, either lead wool or molten lead, which was done a lot historically. So we'll look at a short video clip of resetting a grave marker with stacked bases that has pins that need to be removed. And then we'll come back for some more questions. Hello, in this video we'll be covering the basic procedures for resetting a stone grave marker. Now, two important things to remember when doing this is personal safety and also the object itself. We want to make sure to do no harm to the marker. Now, grave markers are extremely heavy, but also you remember they're extremely delicate. These are pieces of historic fabric that have been weathered for a long period of time. So exercise caution before proceeding with any treatments. Before we get started, we want to make sure that all of our parts are secured and stable. To do this, we will probably have to move the headstone away from the base to give us room to work. It's always best to have someone on hand to help you move the stone. Now that we have separate parts, we're first going to focus on the base. The monument's base is the most important thing. Without a stable and plumb base, any repairs to be done to the stone will run the risk of failing in the future. We can see that this base once had two small bronze pipes inserted to try and stabilize the headstone. For whatever reason in the past, these pins have failed. Our next task is to remove these failed pins. Many times you can remove the old pins with a good pair of vice grip pliers. If this does not work, or the pins have severely corroded, as in the case with most iron pins, you will need to drill the pins out. We will do that with an electric angle grinder fitted with a masonry coring bit. Masonry coring bits are also available for standard drills. When choosing the coring bit to use, select the one closest to the size of the original hole. There is no reason to remove any more original material than is absolutely necessary. This procedure will need to be done on both the base and the headstone. Once the pins are removed and the hole is cleaned out, we need to measure the depth and diameter of the hole. Now we will insert new pins made out of stainless steel all-thread. Stainless steel will not corrode over time the way bronze and steel pins will. You want to make sure that your new pins are just slightly shorter and smaller than the holes. This helps eliminate movement due to expansion and contraction over time. The next thing that we notice about our base are the traces of the old failed hard mortar. We must remove any loose mortar to get a good bond when the stone is reset. We are going to carefully remove the old mortar with a hammer and chisel. This procedure will need to be done to both the base and the headstone. Once we have removed all old materials such as the pins and mortar, it is time to clean the stone. Pay particular attention to the two surfaces that we need to bond together during the resetting. After the stone is washed, we will need to let it dry out before any work can be done. It is a good idea to let the stone dry for a few hours before continuing. Now that our stone is dry, we can prepare the base for the headstone. It is always a good idea to dry fit the stone before placing any compounds or mortars to assure a tight fit. For this reset, we're going to use a Monument Builders setting compound. This material will stay flexible to allow the stone to expand and contract over time and will not break the bond. Also, the setting compound can easily be removed if needed in the future. This causes minimal impact to the historic stone. We start by laying the compound around the edge of the stone, about 1/4 to 1/2 inch away from the edge of the headstone's base. Once the stone is set, the compound will flatten and push out of the sides slightly. Now it is time to place the headstone back on the base. It is important again to lift with 2 people. These structures may be surprisingly heavy, yet delicate, and a great amount of care must be exercised when moving and handling them. Once you have checked that the headstone is level and plumb, and made any adjustments necessary, you must remove any extra setting compound. And there you have it. Now that we've set the marker back on the base, the compound will set itself slowly over time. Now that you've watched this video about the basic procedures for setting a stone grave marker, keep in mind to exercise personal safety and also to do no harm to the markers themselves. And good luck. Well, hopefully that reinforced some of the things we've talked about and showed you some of the techniques being used. At this time, we're almost at the end of our broadcast. We want to ask for any further questions that you may have had, either about cleaning or resetting or any of the things that we've discussed today.
John Hyder, Springfield, Illinois.
Hey, John.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, John.
What is the purpose of a steel pin?
Okay. Well, it depends on how it's being used. A lot of times steel pins are used when broken monuments are put back together. For the case as seen in the video, when the monument was originally set, it had 2 bronze pins in it. And that was to help protect that smaller upright from being knocked over away from that base. So what we did in the video was just replicate the original monument builder's technique by putting those same pins back in. And the reason we went with stainless steel was then to keep away from any of that corrosion or that stain that was caused by the bronze. Now there are people out there who in turn don't put pins back in once they're removed, and their thought process is, well, if the stone gets struck or hit, it'll just go ahead and fall over and there won't be any negative effects by having this reinforcement of metal. However, you also have the same thought process that if you do have pins in the place, then they're going to keep the stone from falling over by helping add some support from that. So there's a big dilemma there and a personal preference between putting pins back or not. My personal preference is if it had a pin, it's been there 150, 200 years, I go ahead and put the pin back in. There was no negative effects of having the pins in there, and who knows, it may have helped it at some point in its life. So we put the pins back in if we take any corroded ones out.
And Jason, sometimes people will use other materials other than steel. Mm-hmm. There's some who use nylon pins because they believe that the nylon pin will break before it will break the stone.
So hopefully that answered John's question. Any other questions that you have out there?
Well, I have one comment, and that is we've talked a lot about the biocides, but there are other cleaning methods that we've used, and there are other products out there that are acceptable. Some of them include the surfactants. Some that we've tested in the past are products like World Environmental Group's Marble and Granite Cleaner. Jason, what are some other surfactants?
Some other surfactants that are used widely in monument conservation and on historic stone. Kodak PhotoFlow, which is actually a rinsing agent for the photography process. It actually is a surfactant and works very well and has been used for a long time. Also Volpex, which is a Conservator soap, that has a surfactant, is used. Also a product called Triton-X, and there's some other numbers. Triton-X 100, I think is the current one. That has a surfactant and is a non-ionic detergent that works well with historic stone.
So Essentially, there's a variety of cleaners that can be used, but we want to make sure that we look at those material safety data sheets and identify those that have the types of cleaning action that we want involved with them, and know what we want to steer clear of. We want to steer away from things that have salts in them, things, looking at things like we don't want water softeners in the cleaner. We don't want anything that has things like sodium EDTA. So we should be able to look at those and help identify them. And if you need more help from them, then you can and you're not sure about a cleaner, you can always call us or email us, and we can try to help you with that. Jason?
Do we have any further questions?
Yes, is there a listing of products that you all recommend in the handouts?
Briefly, the treatment of cracks and splits.
Okay.
Hold on. We had a question first, then I want to get back to the splitting question. We had a question first. Is there a list of products that we recommend? Unfortunately, as National Park Service, we can't endorse any products. But what we can do, of course, is tell you the types of things that should be in the cleaners that we recommend. But we can't really list a sort of a shopping sheet of cleaners that we do recommend. If you go to our website, we have done several cleaning studies. Of course, those can be looked at and see things that came out ahead in the cleaning studies that we've done. Hopefully, you want to add anything to that, to Mary? Or?
Well, we're always available to you. If you're in the National Park Service, you can find us on your Lotus Notes. You find more information about NCPTT that's in the handouts, and we'll try to guide you as best as we can.
Okay. And let's get back to the question. If you'd re-ask it, I heard just a little bit of it about splitting and cracking.
On slate monuments, for example, they have a tendency over time to develop cracks or splits. And where in the Northeast you get into the frost wedging and how would you treat those?
Okay. Now that's a quite complex issue. This goes back to that slide that Mary showed early in the presentation on inherent vice. And yes, slate's really bad for that. Brownstone's really bad for that. And that's the bedding planes that are naturally formed in the stone, and the stone's been cut between those, not between those, but actually includes a few of those, and those start to sheath off. The best thing is preventative maintenance if you have it, and that would be use a color-matched lime mortar or a historically accurate or historically sensitive patch fill material to try to fill in those gaps, to keep the water out, to keep that ice jacking from happening. That's the best method. If you do have pieces that are sheathing off, unfortunately, epoxies don't do a whole lot of good because then you've formed a barrier that water can't move through, and they still have a tendency to sheet off later. So preventative maintenance is the best thing. If you have ones that have gone past that, it may be a good time to consult a professional conservator to get their opinion of your particular issue to see if there's any methods that can be employed to put the stone back together if you've had delamination and loss. But the best thing is to try to fill those gaps with a color-matched lime mortar or with a historic, with a patch fill material made for historic stone. Hopefully that helps.
Right, and we held a workshop in New London, Connecticut this past October where we worked on slates, and it's a far more complex problem than what we can really address here. But we have some experience, and we know professional conservators who do work on slates and might be able to help you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, this is Joe from Saratoga again. Do you have a preference over using historic lime mortar or monument setting compound when resetting a two-piece monument? What are the pros and cons over using each?
Okay. They both work well. My personal preference is I typically use the lime mortar over anything. I'm more familiar with it. I use it. I usually have it on hand. I use it a lot more for resetting, repointing, a variety of applications. So I prefer that. And the main reason there is you can get a good adhesion over an entire surface. Monument setters compound you typically only use on that edge, and that's typically for heavier monuments that the weight of them is really going to help hold it in place. And you're using that setting compound as an adhesion, but also mostly as a protective to keep water between and out of that gap between the bases. I think lime mortar does a very good job of that, and that's typically what I use. Make sure you don't use a real heavy sand, but usually a mason sand works great. Or you can always buy the lime putty that's pre-mixed, of course. But I like that because that causes a good barrier. You can put on a good barrier across the surface, shim it up with some lead, that sort of thing. So a personal preference is going to be the lime usually. And historically that's what's been used. But I've not seen any negative effects personally of using setting compound. Hopefully that answered that question. Any other questions?
One last question from Lincoln's Home. The sharp stone base material, would this be the commercially kind that is produced?
Sure, yeah. You can, any hardware store usually, your large chains, Lowe's, Home Depot, that sort of thing, and of course locals as well, will usually have a bagged gravel that you can buy. And if you're fortunate enough to live in an area that has a mason yard, they usually have gravel that's available there. But the only thing you want to stay away from is that smooth pea gravel, that sort of fish tank style gravel that you see. And this has a tendency, when it gets water and it freezes, just to cause a ball bearing effect that can actually allow the monument to roll around on it. So if you've got a larger monument, a larger gravel works well. And of course, if you have small ones, the smaller gravel. But yeah, you want something that's a little sharper than sort of the tumbled stone. And I think we're about out of time for questions, so I've been told we have plenty of time. Any other questions? Well, we may have gotten them all already. That's good.
Joe from Saratoga again.
Yes.
You talked about old repairs and old methods that have failed. When you have a marble tablet that's been puddled in concrete and it's leaning now, in jeopardy, what's the gentlest method to get that old concrete off of there so it can be reset properly?
Okay. To really address that particular, I'd be very happy to look at some photographs to see how severely it's set into the concrete, if it's around the base or the entire length. But if it's already starting to fail, a lot of times that's a difficult one. Sometimes it comes off very easily, that it was never bonded all that well, and a sharp chisel will take it off. Unfortunately, sometimes that actually takes the marble off as well, which is what we don't want to do. We want to try to take that off without damaging the marble. So that might be an issue that we could look at a photograph and sort of help you along on that one.
There have been times when the concrete is so severe that it's so much on the base that you have to sacrifice some of those materials by cutting it off. It depends on where it's at and how much you have left. But we have had situations where we've had to cut the stone and create a new slot for a new base. That's your last resort. That's why we often steer very clear of saying to use Portland cement or concrete in any way. We've seen situations where grave markers have been set back down long ways into concrete blocks, and then there's really nothing you can do.
Yeah, as well, you know, a sharp hammer and chisel, as well as water grinders. These are angle grinders that are water fed, similar to what we saw in the video that I was using to do coring with. You can also get cutting blades on this. This would have to take a skilled operator, and of course it would matter how close your marble was to the concrete that's been pulled around. You know, you wouldn't want to get too close to the concrete itself, to the marble itself to do any damage to that. But, you know, Joe, I'd be happy to look at a photograph of that, and we'll have our contact information to see if we could address that a little bit more closely. Any other questions? Okay, if there's more questions this time, we'd like to also tell you a little bit about an upcoming event that many of you may be interested in. NCPTT is organizing and hosting a nationwide cemetery preservation summit. This is October 19th through the 21st in Nashville, Tennessee. And you can find more information about this and also register for this on our NCPTT website. Now, with this, we're bringing in people from all across the country to talk about issues with cemetery preservation, and that's small cemeteries, large cemeteries, also national cemeteries, like the ones that the battlefields have here in the National Park Service. You know, what are some of the issues that you're dealing with? What are the issues that people are dealing with across the country in cemetery preservation? What are the new techniques? What are the new research? And what are the things that have been working for people? So that's some of the things that will be covered in that workshop and that summit. Also available on our website will be the archive of this TEL broadcast and ones that we've given previously. And also the videos that you've seen, the cleaning, the resetting, some of the ones that we'll see later this afternoon about iron fence repair, also lime washing, planting historic trees. We have a wide variety of training videos available on our website. These are available as free downloads or also available as DVDs through our product catalog. So you might want to go on our website and look for some of that information. Also, to move further toward the end of this course is, of course, getting credit for it. And to do that, you need to take the online evaluation. It's important to take this within 2 weeks of the course to get credit. And you can take the evaluation by going to the TEL website and clicking on the DOI Learn tab and going to the link under this class, which is the Essentials for Cemetery Monument Care. And it's always important to get credit for what you've participated in.
We'd like to thank you. We know that your schedules are very busy, and we thank you for taking the time out of your schedule today to join us. We hope that the workshop that we provided today, the TEL course we provided, will be very useful to you. And finally, we hope to see you back with us at 3 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time today for the basics in iron fence repair. Thank you so much.